My brother-in-law told the buyers I was just the man who cut keys. Then he sold the hardware store I had kept alive for 22 years out from under me. We were standing by the paint mixer, the one my dad taught me to load when I was a kid who could barely see over the counter, and two people from a regional chain had a binder open on the key-cutting bench. Greg tipped his head at me the way you point out a slow drip in the ceiling. That's Wade, my wife's brother. He runs the floor, keeps the lights on, and we think the world of him. But between us, he was always more of a key and washer man than a businessman. He won't be any trouble in the transition. Then he turned back to the binder. I had opened that store at 6 in the morning for 22 years and made the rent in the months the whole town was broke. I kept my mouth shut. When a man has run a corner store long enough, he learns the difference between the one doing the talking and the one whose name is on the lease. My name is Wade Hale. My father opened Hale Hardware on the corner of 3rd and Main, and when his heart gave out, I was 26 and I took it over with a wall of half-empty bins and a stack of bills. I filled those bins one invoice at a time for the next 22 years. People did not come for the prices. They came because I knew which washer fit a 1962 sink, and I would walk them to the aisle myself. We never owned that building. We rented it the way my father always had from Sal Vincent, who owned the block and had shaken my dad's hand on a lease back when they both had dark hair. That lease and the corner it sat on were the only reason a chain wanted us at all. There was one thing about that lease that Greg had never bothered to read, and I had never made a speech about. The lease was in my name. Wade Hale, personally, not the store company, not my sister, not anyone Greg could sign for. 9 years back, the old lease ran out, and Greg did not want to drive across town to put his name on paper for what he called a dying corner store. So Sal and I sat down and wrote a new one, just the two of us, a long term at a fair rent that only worked because we trusted each other. We put it in plain language that it could not be handed off, assigned, or transferred to a new tenant without my signature and Sal's blessing. Sal had told me more than once that when our paper ran out, he would re-sign with me and nobody else. He had watched chains hollow out 3 other corners in the county, and he was not about to hand them this one. The corner, the foot traffic, the 22 years of people knowing where to turn, none of it moved an inch without the two of us. A thing like that is not something you wave around at the family table. You just keep paying the rent on the first and trust that the paper says what it says. Greg had never worked a day on that floor. He sold commercial real estate 2 counties over, married my sister Diane, and came around at Christmas to tell me how he would have run the place. When our father died, the store came half to me and half to Diane, and Diane lived 3 states away and let her husband speak for her half. Greg looked at that half as money that had not been paid out yet. He started telling the vendors that Wade does his best, but it is more of a hobby than a business out there, and let it be known that the real decisions ran through him now. I let him talk. A man can tell himself a door is still open long after his own family has quietly turned the bolt. What nobody at that key bench had thought to check was whether the thing they were selling could actually be delivered. The chain did not want my inventory or my name. They wanted the corner, the lease, the location that took 4 decades to season. Greg had a price and a handshake and a story about his small-time brother-in-law. He did not have a lease he was allowed to sign over. I did not make a scene by the paint mixer. 22 years of bad winters, slow Decembers, and salesmen who smiled while they raised my cost teaches a man to stay quiet until he can see the whole aisle. I had no wish to embarrass Greg in front of strangers. I had one fact none of them had checked. When a store on a corner gets sold, the floor crew is never the first thing that matters. The lease under the floor is, and whose name signed it. The chain was a careful company, and careful companies send a lawyer to read the paper before they wire the money. Their attorney pulled the lease and the assignment terms the way anyone should, and a lease does not care who got called a key and washer man. It reads the way it was signed. The tenant of record was Wade Hale. The term still had years on it at a rent no new tenant would ever see again, and the assignment clause was plain as a price tag. No transfer, no new tenant, no handing the corner to a buyer without the signature of Wade Hale and the consent of the landlord, Sal Vincent. The store they were buying did not come with the one thing they were paying for, which was the right to stand on that corner. They held the closing in the chain's district office. with their lawyer and a leasing officer the company had brought in, a brisk man with a folder and a stack of tabs. He set down the lease abstract and went through it. "Before we fund," he said, "we confirm the seller can convey possession of the premises. The lease names an individual tenant and the assignment is restricted. The corner does not transfer without his signature and the landlord's consent. Which of you is Wade Hale?" Greg said it was an old lease nobody had updated. The leasing officer said a signed long-term lease with a no assignment clause does not update itself, and asked again which man at the table was Wade Hale. I said that was me, the one he keeps on the floor to cut keys. He matched the premises in the lease against the store they thought they were buying, line by line, and the room kept losing its noise while he read. Same address, same corner, same restrictions, signed and dated and clean. He turned the folder so the buyers could read it for themselves. "This is not a paperwork mix-up," he said. "The store can change hands, but the location cannot. The tenant on this lease is Wade Hale, and the corner you are paying for does not move without him, and without Sal Vincent agreeing to paper a new lease, which I am told he will not do for a chain. There is nothing here for the company to buy that is worth the price." Nobody argued. The district office got the kind of quiet a store gets after the door closes on the last customer of the year. Greg stared at the lease like he had just learned the corner he married into had a name on it that was not his. He looked across the table at me, sawdust still on my sleeve from the morning, and the deal went out of his face. Underneath it was a man who had spent years sure that half the place was his to sell, finding out at the table that the corner had been mine to hold the whole time. "Wade," he said, and it came out small, nothing like more of a key man than a businessman. It would have been easy to let the lawyer keep reading until the deal came apart in a way that would follow Greg to every client who ever shook his hand. 22 years of carrying a place gives a man that much weight if he wants to set it down on someone. I did not. I have buried my father, run that floor through 2 recessions, and I have never once enjoyed watching family go under, least of all a man my sister built a life with. I closed the folder and put my hand flat on it. "The store keeps its name and its corner," I told them. "The lease stays mine, the way Sal and I wrote it. The men who work the floor keep their jobs, and no one writes me off as the key man in my own store again, or trots me out like a fixture that comes with the building." I said it level. A man who made the rent in the months the town had no money does not have to raise his voice the day the lease finally sits on his side of the table. After that, the room went quiet in a way Greg had not earned. When I stood up, the people who mattered came with me. The chain's lawyer said his client did not buy stores it could not actually occupy, and the deal was done. Marcus, who had run my plumbing aisle for 15 years, said he stayed if I stayed. Young Reuben, who had asked me twice that winter why he was never shown the lease drawer, said he was staying too. They stood with me because they knew who unlocked the door in the ice storms, who covered a man's hours the year his boy was sick, and who had never once made a green kid feel small for asking. I am 48, and I went back to the front counter the way I have always worked it, except now the whole town knew whose name held the corner without my ever raising it. The chain walked off a deal they could not actually buy, and that felt less like a win than like finding a latch I forgot I had thrown. I run Hale Hardware the way my father did, slower and surer than Greg ever gave me credit for, and I am teaching young Reuben to read a lease the way Sal taught me, the tenant name first, the assignment clause first, before anyone shakes a hand on a corner. The sign over the door still says, Hale. It still means what it always meant. Greg does not have a hand in the store anymore. He comes in some Saturdays and works the register beside me, and I let him because he is family and because a man keeps a few aisles open that have nothing to do with leases. He does not call it a hobby now. He does not say a great deal at all. For 22 years, I was the brother-in-law they parked at the key counter, and they took that to mean a man who could be handled quietly in the transition. They were half right. I did cut keys. I cut keys, I said hello, I let them think the running of it was a small thing. I just never let go of the corner because the lease only ever answered to my name, and a location is the one thing a story cannot sell out from under the man who signed for it. You can call a man the key counter guy all you like. Just be sure he is not still holding the lease to the corner. If stories about the people who quietly hold the whole place together and get written off as small time mean something to you, subscribe. There is a new one here every week. If you had been at that counter, would you have let the leasing officer read the whole clause out loud or close the folder the way I did? Tell me below. And if there is someone in your life who built something with his own 2 hands and got moved aside as not a real businessman, send this to him. He will know.